everyone? How's everyone doing this morning? Good? So we have an exciting, we're going to have an exciting conversation with two unbelievable writers, Claudia and Bernardine, writers whose work resist, enlighten, electrify our bodies and spirits, and keep us questioning. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to dive right into it and ask about the journey. Let's start with the journey. So Bernardine, in the introduction of your wonderful, if you haven't read it, please do, wonderful book, Manifesto, on never giving up. The first sentence reads, when I won the Booker Prize in 2019 for my novel, Girl, Woman, Other, I became an overnight success. Claudia, you wrote, when you wrote, Don't Let Me Be Lonely, your publisher, as you said, got rid of you. Fast forward, you won the MacArthur Genius Award, amongst many others. So what is it like on this side of success? What have you discovered? Do you feel you have new responsibilities? What are the changes, if any, in your journey?
Good afternoon. It's a real honor to be here with both of you and with you all. You know, I think that when my publisher refused to publish Don't Let Me Be Lonely, I was kind of shocked because I thought if you had a publisher, you just had a publisher. And then you give them the next thing, and they published it. But they're like, when you write some poetry, you can come back to us. But we're not publishing this. I'm like, this is my poetry. And, but it was okay. There were 10 other publishers who said, we'll take it. So I'm not complaining, and also it turned out that Grey Wolf is a much better fit for me, and they've been my publisher ever since. Back then, the books, when they were written, they went to the people who needed them, who wanted them, who loved them. After Citizen and the MacArthur, I found that it was a little bit less about the work and more about me on a single subject. So people now come to me to talk about race relations in the United States, which I can do because I am a person in the United States, but it's not the only thing I think about, but I feel like there has been that dynamic that has happened.
Yes. So the sort of the other side of success has been the last 4 years. Just to say that I remember when Claudia won the Forward Prize, 2015, which is one of the two top poetry prizes in the UK, and probably the best known one. And it was an amazing thing because I think you were the first black woman to win that prize. I'm pretty sure you were. And you won it with Citizen, with a really political book. And the sort of poetry culture of the UK, almost up to that point, would kind of overlook books like yours. So it was an incredible thing, and that was when I first encountered you, and when we were celebrating so much because it was a turning point for, you know, writers of colour, poets of colour in the UK. And then when I won the Booker Prize, you know, 4 years later, and also you were an older woman, so that was great. You know, you were an older woman walking away with this prize, and it always felt as if you would only walk away with these prizes if you broke through in a big way as a young writer, you know? And so for me to win the Booker at the age of 60, you know, having published, it was my 8th book, having been in the arts 40 years, publishing books for 26 years, whatever it was at the time, that was a very unusual thing to happen. And so suddenly I was discovered by a much wider audience than previously, which is something that I have celebrated ever since, because, you know, I really wanted that kind of attention. And in terms of the sort of responsibilities, I've always been, I would call myself a literary activist as well. And I've always set up arts inclusion projects and so on. And the difference is that I was listened to in a different way and given more opportunities once I won the Booker Prize. It's very interesting how in the world of literature, these prizes, which are sometimes quite randomly awarded, it's all about the people in the room in any given year, and every year that changes. There are a couple of really big prizes in Italy and France, which, to my horror, the juries never change. It's always the same jury until they die. And I think it's the same with the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize, it's the same jury. Whereas in, you know, in other countries, it's always being, you know, the jury is always changing. And that means that it depends on the balance of people in that room, whether or not they're going to appreciate your work, or whether somebody's going to bat for you and you're going to win. You know, in my case, I shared it with Margaret Atwood. So it was a complete career changer for me, yes. And I unashamedly celebrate it even today.
Absolutely. So what do you think, you know, society shifted, you know, as you guys were writing these incredible books. What is it like now, you feel? What shifted? What's changed that creates these spaces? I mean, apart from all the work that you've been doing in the background before it came to light, right? Not only in the in the books you were writing, but all that you were participating and creating space for those voices to sort of come through. So could you speak a little bit more about, you know, society shifting?
Well, I think it's sort of an extension of the first question. If you have a system where the power structure remains the same, then the same things keep happening because those are the people who have the power to make the things happen. And in our case, I think that we are now in rooms we hadn't been in before. And our presence in those rooms means that we can advocate for writers, poets, all kinds of people who are doing work that speaks to issues that others might find troubling or outside their range of understanding. And that, I think, has been across the board. And in the US, there is a backlash against this. You know, this idea of diversifying the prizes, diversifying the organizations. People, I think, did not understand that you don't invite women in, you don't invite people of color in, and they won't have an impact. And once the impact shows itself, then they want to shut it down. I was once, I'll tell the quick story, I was once invited to, I won't say, you know, I'm so bad because I'm always naming things, so I won't I'm trying my best to be discreet. But I was once invited to give out these very important prizes. And I did it the first year. And each person who had done it up until the time that I had done it was given a 3-year period. And the first year happened, there was a big party, and I'm just gonna say this, these white women, older white women came up to me and said, "Who are these people? They're not writers." And they took it away from me. But they couldn't just take it away from me and say, she cannot have the next 2 years. So they shut it down. They literally shut it down and said that they now were going to retake control. So it got 1 year's people through, and that was it. But it was better than nothing. But, so that's how it works. It's just, that's how police, the prizes have been, the publication world has been. I mean, I live in a democracy, so, and but that's what that democracy has looked like.
I think in the UK, we've always looked up to America because there's always seemed to be a really powerful body of African-American writers getting published and within the industry, and I don't know if that's true. And when I speak to African-Americans, they say, oh no, it's really tough. But comparing it to the UK, it's always felt that you've always been in a much stronger position, simply because the demographics are so different, the numbers are so different. But in the UK, I would say up to maybe 10 years ago, I knew all the black writers who published books. Right? I knew everybody individually. And what's happened in the last few years is that there are now so many black British writers that I can't keep track of them. And I've given up trying to keep track of them. So that's a really important development. And I think a lot of them are women, I have to say. But I think that is partly to do with Black Lives Matter, the first iteration and the second, kind of shifting the consciousness of the publishing industry and realizing that they needed to become more inclusive. And then actually discovering that these voices, who historically have not really been heard in the UK, are re-energizing literature, whether it's fiction or poetry or perhaps less so non-fiction because there isn't a lot of it, but because simply those perspectives, those cultural backgrounds, the heritage, the points of view are doing something very different. And that's been really, really exciting. And so a lot of writers of colour are walking off with the awards. We haven't had a backlash against it yet. But when you look at the history, and I think, Nathalie, you know quite a lot about the history of British lit poetry, when you look at the history, it was so exclusively white that in 2004, when I was judging this big poetry scheme with a lot of other people, no poets of colour were submitted, and I initiated a report called the Free Verse Report, which revealed that under 1% of poetry books were by poets of colour in the UK, under 1%. So then I initiated this mentoring scheme over a period of 10 years, and everything has shifted and changed. But those voices are still quite new in terms of the history of British poetry. And then the publishing industry, certainly with the murder of George Floyd, really was shaken up by it. And there were calls for the industry to change at every level. And we certainly saw that. I haven't kept tabs on it because we know what happens. The industry starts to make these changes, but unless it's really deeply, unless it's done from a place of integrity and real commitment, then people forget about it. And we are now 4 years after the murder of George Floyd, aren't we? So, we'll see what that looks like in the future. And also there are many more black critics and Asian critics who are coming through and also contributing to the whole conversation around literature. So I would say that the last 2 or 3 years, it's been a really interesting time because so many writers of colour have been published. And one of the things I was arguing for was for not only to have writers of colour getting published, but that we should be publishing in every genre. Because historically, we've published poetry and literary fiction. Now, the books that dominate the bestseller lists, the books that actually drive the economic engine of the industry, generally it's not literary fiction. It's commercial fiction and all those different genres, crime in particular, and so on. And so that has also started to happen. We've got people writing in those genres, and some of them are doing very well. So it's a very, very interesting time in the UK, but also I'm very skeptical. The backlash, we're always seeing signs of it, and I'm under no illusion that we are embedded in the culture in the way that we need to be.
Can I ask you a question, though? I mean, when you won the Booker, you won it as a co-winner. Had that ever happened before?
Yes.
How many times?
It happened once before. That's a big story, which I have never divulged in public. But one day, people will get to hear it. But Michael Ondaatje. Michael Ondaatje won the Booker Prize. I think it was in '94 with another writer. I can't remember who his name. No. Ben Okri won it on his own. Yeah, and then they changed the rules, so it couldn't happen again, and then it did. But like I say, that's a long story.
So I just bring it up to say that the adjustments have adjustments.
Yeah.
And it's great because once you've won it, you've won it. But we shouldn't sugarcoat the process. What's happening is still happening.
Yeah. Totally, which brings to mind the current situation we're living in at the moment in the world. When I think of what's happening, Claudia, your line, "You can't keep the past buried," resonates. So South Africa is leading us when it comes to justice today. As an activist and as someone who has written about justice and whose work is really, both of you, deeply rooted in that, how do you respond to the injustice happening, to the brutalities of the scenes that we're watching on television, especially being citizens of the United States and the United Kingdom? And to sort of paraphrase, if language tells us something, creates, hurts, and saves us, how do you respond today? What are you both thinking about at the moment?
Well, my country, always getting involved. It's not an empire anymore. It's not the powerhouse that it once was when it owned a quarter of the world. As a writer, I am interested in telling stories, and what underpins my stories is an understanding of the world from my political perspective. I don't get involved in politics with a capital P if I can avoid it, because the way in which people are getting involved in that today is through social media, and that is a very toxic space. And I see people I know and respect shouting off on social media, and they are giving all their energy to it as if the world is listening to them. The world is not listening to British poets shouting about what's happening in the world. And they are draining their energy. And what I feel they need to be doing is putting that energy into their work and putting their politics into the work in all the ways that we can do that. When I write my stories, my characters are not mouthpieces for my politics, but what underpins my creative project, of course, my politics. I want to write stories about the African diaspora, but I also want to write about humans, and humans, almost none of whom ever represent what I believe in, because that wouldn't be interesting for me as a novelist, right? And it wouldn't be interesting for my audience. I occupy establishment positions, and so often there is a lot of politics to be played in those positions, and I'm very aware of it. And I realize that even though I occupy establishment positions, I am still an outsider voice. I still have, in a sense, the grassroots sensibility that I developed as a very young woman, when I was definitely on the outside of the mainstream, as we call it. So now I'm inside the heart of the establishment, but I've still got my radical politics. And I change it in all the ways that I can from inside, as opposed to like lobbing rocks at the citadel. The politics of the sort of geopolitical landscape at the moment is fascinating and terrifying, and we're living in an age of cancel culture, not the cancel culture that the right wing talks about, where people like myself have always been cancelled, right? It's the cancel culture where those who believe in progressive politics, those who have been historically treated as outsiders, those who have not had a voice. In my culture, it could be on account of gender, class in particular, ethnicity, neurodiversity, sexual, all those things. We've always been cancelled, right? Because we haven't even had the opportunities. We now have some of these opportunities. But the cancel culture that exists in the UK, in particular in the media, which is, I think it's safe to say, mainly right-wing, is one that is trying to suppress those voices. And so when these things are kicking off in certain parts of the world, then it's a very delicate situation in terms of what is explored, who gets a chance to speak, and so on. So I know I'm being vague as I progress with this conversation. I know I'm being vague because I have to be vague. But yeah, that's a response.
You know, I should be more like Bernardine. Probably that's the case. But I think, I hope that if I had been alive in the 1940s, I would have condemned Nazism. I would have said any form of genocide is genocide. So I can't stand today and see what looks like genocide and not call it genocide. What happened on October 7th was horrible. You don't kill people, you don't take them from your house, you don't take them as hostages. That is not acceptable, it's horrible, it's deplorable. What happened on October 8th was horrible. On the 9th, horrible. On the 10th, horrible. The Balfour Agreement was horrible. The taking away people's homes was horrible. All of it. All of it. I do not support any of it. So we are being made as citizens of whatever country we're in to stand by and be complicit with genocide as more and more people are dying. Every day the numbers are going up and up and up. And then we are then put in this position that Bernardine has just spoken about, where if we speak about it, we are told that we will be canceled. So now this other mechanism is coming towards us, trying to silence us about something we all should understand to be unacceptable. So that's my position on that.
Thank you. Bell Hooks said, if I were really asked to define myself, I couldn't start with race. I wouldn't start with blackness. I wouldn't start with gender. I wouldn't start with feminism. I would start with stripping down to what fundamentally informs my life, which is that I'm a seeker on the path, a path about love. Can you speak about love?
Can I just say, something's leaking on my head. Seriously.
Oh yeah, something was leaking over there a minute ago.
Maybe if we just move forward a bit, then it will avoid my head. I hope it's not acid. It's very interesting because, as we said in the green room, well, I said in the green room, I'm never asked about love. And when people talk about my work, they never talk about love, right? Even though one of my books is called Mr. Loverman. And I think as a writer, I explore lots and lots of different things, but relationships are also at the heart of my books. And when people say to me, oh yes, you're writing about identity, which is what I'm told a lot, and that is it's lazy thinking. And, you know, academics ask this or state this, and critics state this. Bernardine Evaristo is writing about identity, as are most black writers, almost as if we're trying to find ourselves. And we haven't evolved to the stage where we can write about the big issues in life because we're writing about ourselves. Girl, Woman, Other is about 12 very different characters. I was sitting in a studio with the BBC with a presenter, who's a very experienced presenter, who said, oh yeah, but these characters are all versions of you, aren't they? So you have a 93-year-old farmer who lives in the north of England, never left the farm, you know, and you have a 19-year-old university student, and then you have a Nigerian immigrant who's a cleaner and, you know, a school teacher. And, you know, these are not me, but everything is reduced to me. And I sometimes think that I wish they'd look at my work through a different prism, because love is something that I do explore. You know, Girl, Woman, Other, which is the book people might know here, is about relationships. Love is sown throughout the work. It's about romantic relationships. It's about family. You know, you could say that my work is at the heart of my work. What drives me is a love for humanity. I know that's very cliched and generalized, but it's a love for humanity, but in particular for my community. And wanting to explore my community in the broadest sense, I'm talking about the African diaspora, through honoring it through the stories that I tell. And I am sustained by love. You know, the love of the individuals in my life, the love people show me, actually the love readers show me these days, which is great. So yeah, those are some of the ideas I have on love in this context.
That is a different question. It's true. It's really a human question, and so I appreciate it. But it doesn't mean I know how to answer it. Beyond what we know, that we're all, in the end, writing about relationships. We're writing about one person up against another person, and what that is, and why you care. I mean, I wouldn't care if love wasn't in the mix. If some sense of wanting to be recognized by the other, held by the other, wasn't part of it. But it's funny, I'm doing a little scan of my work, and I don't write what you would traditionally think about. Because you're right, Girl, Woman, Other, in every one of those sections, it's a parent and a child, it's a lover and their partner working it out, friendships, colleagues, mothers, daughter, you know, all those kinds of things. And the landscape of my work really, if I had to locate it, thinks a lot about justice. And for me, I don't need to love anybody, but I do need justice. I don't need you to love me, but I do need justice. I do need to feel that I'm seen and that I see you. How I feel about you on a certain level, should be irrelevant on a one-on-one basis. Who I love my husband, I love my daughter, I love my friends. I don't know any of you, so I can love you. But I think that, you know, I have some expectations from you as we coexist inside a space. And that is what drives my work.
And we could say that love, justice is love, right? Everything in a way is love, right? I mean,
Well, the phrase is justice is how love shows itself in public.
exactly. Thank you. So I'd love to ask, what are you questioning at the moment? What is the question on your mind at the moment and in the work that maybe you don't want to reveal what you're writing on. So perhaps you can give us an idea of what you've been thinking about, questioning, even if, of course, we know it's in the lines of what you've been doing, justice and so forth, but is there one question? Claudia, I remember for your book, the idea of loneliness, the idea of this idea of loneliness being at the center of the poem itself, right? What is the question at the moment on your mind?
Thinking.
I can actually answer that. Because I'm working on a book right now. And the book is about couches. And I have, and what it means, but what it really is about is what it means for us right now to be in the world when the world is collapsing. And how do we hold that knowledge? Climate change is real. In the United States, Donald Trump is real. These things, they are real. And they have enormous effect, not just on me or Americans, but on our global economy, those two things. If he regains power in the United States, it will affect you. It will also affect decisions around climate change. It could speed it up. So how, when I was a kid, when I was in college, as a 21, 22-year-old going out in the world, I thought, my life is before me. I can do anything. The world could do anything. And it will go on long after I am gone. I don't think about it that way anymore. And I don't know if young people think about it that way anymore. I know that some of them don't. So I'm really trying to understand how to talk about a future that has presented itself with limits. How we proceed in the face of that. I'm a big tennis fan, I guess is the word. 4 times a year, my life is stopped by the US Open, the Australian Open, and I actually watch all of it. And I was watching the Australian Open, and there was some kerfuffle in the stands, and one of the commentators said, oh, I think somebody's sick. I don't think it's one of those people objecting. And what she meant was objecting to climate change and interrupting our sports to point out that other things are happening in the world. And I thought, you could be like that. You can see reality as an inconvenience, or you could see reality and figure out how we as a culture should start dealing with that. Because I was just saying to somebody out in the hallway, because I went to this great thing where the small children were writing books on sustainability, and they were so incredible. And I was thinking, when will we start reading children's books that connect up the lack of resources with refugees, so that they understand that the refugees are not coming because they want to come, but because wherever they're coming from, their resources have been taken away a long time ago. And climate change is hitting them first. And refugee status is not single without, as you said, a history buried within it. And so those, they went as far as talking about the consequences of climate change and sustainability. But I was waiting for somebody to mention the refugees. And when that happens at one of those conferences, then I'll feel like we are actually doing our work fully. So that's a long answer to your question.
I think one of the questions that I have been grappling with for a long time is how Britain reconciles its imperial history, which is it's a really sensitive subject, and it's one that I think people's opinions on it are getting more entrenched. And there is a feeling in the UK that if you question and challenge the dominant historical narrative of Britain and its empire, including slavery, that you are a traitor, that you are somehow damaging and besmirching the reputation of your country, which is a really ridiculous position to hold, because it's almost as if they're saying that Britain's history is perfect, that it's been benign and beneficial to the countries that it colonized and to the millions of people it enslaved. It wasn't until 2007 that Britain started to almost make public its involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. And it was, I think, the major slave trading nation of that era for a very long time. And Britain's wealth and its foundations have been built on the proceeds of slavery and colonialism. And especially at the moment, in the media, also with some academics, they are creating this kind of this kind of justifying it to, and it's now being disseminated to the wider population, so that people are starting to think that that history was justifiable and that it wasn't as damaging and dangerous and, quite frankly, evil as it was in so many ways in so many parts of the world. And this is a new development in the sense that this kind of oppositional approach to interrogating British history and not wanting to look at the difficult areas of it is now being celebrated. And the whole idea that you are a traitor, which is the language being used by politicians. Some of them are people of colour, right? Politicians who are people of colour, because we do have an Asian man who is Prime Minister of Britain and a Conservative. But at the very highest level, it's almost like people are being accused of treason to even dare to question it. Somebody called Corinne Fowler wrote a book, I think it was called Colonial Countryside, where she was investigating, the colonial history of Britain through its big families and big country houses, the aristocracy, and how that money came from slavery. And she was vilified in the media for even daring to question this. And this is a very balanced, reasonable academic publication. So that's something that I'm looking at, and that's something that really worries me, that people, they want to rewrite history, but they also want to justify the sort of very difficult areas of it where we should just be open and explore it and examine it and admit what happened and understand that there are multiple perspectives on it.
Well, you know, in the United States, that's where we are now. So just come over.
Well, before we open it to the public for Q&A, I'd love to have a few words on belonging. We are, of course, the history, our human history is one of migrations, right? But as you spoke about all this mass movement of people right now, there are so many people moving, and we are living in cities, global city, New York and so forth, Abu Dhabi, where really so many people from all over coming and exist in one space. And the question of belonging and this conversation that we have in classrooms as well as professors is one that comes, and in our works and in all that we've been speaking about right now. Can you speak about belonging, say a few words on what's on your mind?
You know, I am 60, in my 60s now, and it's been one of the exciting things for me as somebody who's getting older is the way in which the younger generation, my students, have challenged me to open up my ideas around belonging in terms of gender. That would be the most sensitive one in the classroom now because of the pronoun and the pronoun shifts. And I love it because I feel like I am being asked to rethink things that I took for granted. And you know, just in terms of using they. At first, it was awkward. And it was awkward not because I, you know, think anyone should not have what they want or need. It was just awkward grammatically to work collectively in single. But now I've gotten used to it. So I love that we are, as a people, never still. And that our notions of belonging are always being adjusted, and we're always being asked to make more room. And the day that I feel like I cannot make room for another is the day that I'll feel old, truly old, and behind. Because I feel like this fight against this one and that one and that one has to do with a kind of scarcity thinking, a kind of anxiety that something will be taken away from them. And that's what I don't understand. Like, what do you think is going to be taken away from you? That your existence has to come with somebody else's fall or exclusion. So I'm really interested in the flex in humanity. Like, how open are we going to be? And how open are we going to ask our societies to become? Because I don't think we can depend on the establishment to create the openness. We're going to have to push it open.
Just to add to that, I don't have any profound words right now to say about belonging, but what I think is very interesting is that there is definitely a generational divide between the various gender identities that young people are exploring and certainly our generation. And that is really worrying because in my experience, I think people refuse to engage with it and refuse to understand it. And yet, young people in their teens and early 20s, they are accepting it as the norm. And there is a huge chasm between the older generation, who actually at the moment still have the power in society in every way possible, and young people who are coming through and are so open to all the possibilities that are out there, which I agree with you. I think it's a wonderful thing, and we need to adjust and accept it. Yeah, that's my addition.
Okay, we'll open it to all of you. I see one hand. Okay. Go ahead. All the way in the back there, right there.
Hello, thank you both. I wanted to ask how hard it has been writing for decades in an industry that's dominated by white middle classes. What's the picture now for writers of colour? Is there still some corrections to be made? What work needs to be done? And I say this as someone who recently heard an agent saying that writers of colour are getting, and I quote directly, too much money. So I just wondered sort of what work still needs to be done and how hard it has been up until this point.
Well, you know, it's writers of colour are getting too much money. That's truly shocking, because the reality is, and there was a big kind of campaign, if you like, a few years ago, where it was sort of discovered that writers of colour weren't being paid the same amounts as their white counterparts. And certainly in my experience, that is the case. But as I say, I mean, I think it's different. I don't know what's happening in America, but definitely there has been a shift where there is a lot more interest and acceptance in stories by writers of colour. But historically, it's been very, very difficult. Very, very. The publishing industry actually is very female at most levels apart from the leadership level. So like the big CEOs of the big publishing companies, and also the smaller publishing companies, tend to be men. They're all white. The poetry industry, which is the industry I was in at the beginning of my career, was exclusively white, and all the editors were male. That has barely shifted, and almost exclusively middle class. Publishing is a very middle class industry. It's also a very white industry. I have been to many literary events with big publishing houses where the only people of colour are the writers and the people serving the canapes. So it's been an issue. I like to think it's changing somewhat at the moment, but yeah, that's been the reality. But then I spoke a bit earlier about how I think things have changed a bit. Okay.
I have a question, a curiosity. In your book, Bernardine, Manifesto, right at the beginning is a quotation from a film. I never saved anything for the swim back. Why did you choose that?
Yeah, Gattaca. I love that film, Gattaca. Because years ago, when I was starting out in the arts, and also like after 10 years, I was then starting to publish books, I felt like, you know, I had to believe in myself, because nobody was waiting for my work, nobody believed in me. In the UK, there were hardly any poets of colour, black poets getting published, and then hardly any novelists when I started to write novels. And I wasn't earning much money until I was in my, well, till 4 years ago. So, you know, in a sense, I could look at it in a way that I could say everything was stacked against me. That's not how I see it now, but that I could say that. And so it would have been very easy to give up. It would have been very easy to have some kind of safety net, some kind of second career that I would fall back on if my writing career didn't work. People didn't believe in me in the way that I learned to believe in myself. So nobody, when I when I published my books, nobody said, my God, this is an amazing writer, she's going to have a great career. So I had to develop self-motivation, self-discipline, self-belief, all of those things that you need to be a writer, as well as resilience and tenacity and all of those things. And so when I say I never saved anything for the swim back, that's what I mean. I mean, I gave it, and I hate saying 100%, because everybody says 100% now, it's a cliche, it's terrible. But I gave it 1,000%. And I believed in myself that I would break through in the way that I needed to eventually. That's what I mean.
Thank you so much. This session has been absolutely incredible. Pretty powerful and comforting for me. So as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm from England. Woo. And I was yesterday years old when I found out that you're from my uni, Brunel. So I was like, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So I have two questions, as in one for each of you. So for Bernardine, as a fellow Brit interrogating British history and as part of the diaspora, I often still see on social media people speaking loudly, but fundamentally missing that historical context. So when you write about the African diaspora, how do you write knowing people still have a very primitive, savage view of the continent? I really hate the term third world, especially knowing that you may not always be able to give them that context within your pages. And then for Claudia, you talked...
Shall I just answer that first, because I'll forget it? Actually, one of my books, Blonde Taurus, is a satire where I invert the transatlantic slave trade and create a world where Africans enslave Europeans. And so in this book, the Europeans are savages and the Africans consider themselves to be civilized. So I actually, in that book, I directly address all the stereotypes about Africa. You know, that we were savages and that the Europeans gave us culture, and I break it down in terms of all the different cultural things that we might relate to. It might be food, religion, relationships, all kinds of things. And then I expose the savagery of European history, British and European history, you know, and it's as savage as any other, always going to war, even today, right? So I absolutely directly address that. But in my other works, I'm not really addressing that. Each book is exploring a different thing, whether it's the black presence in Britain and in Roman times, you know, The Emperor's Babe is a novel where I have a black girl who grows up in Roman London because there were black people in Roman Britain nearly 2,000 years ago. That's historical fact. And after I wrote the book, they discovered that there were black people in Roman London, which is where it's set. Even though when I wrote it, they said, no, there weren't any black people in Roman London. But then a couple of years later, they discovered there were. So each book explores a different era of the African diaspora, and I do it through characterization and storytelling. That's what I focus on. People will bring whatever they want to it, and hopefully they will connect to the humanity of the characters. But the kind of macro issues, I definitely went head-to-head with that in Blonde Roots, which I think they have on sale here.
Love that. And then for Claudia, you talk about the shifting goalposts, especially for melanated individuals when they're trying to make a stride. The rules change, Simone Biles being a prime example. So with that and the constant changes, do you feel that you write differently because you are aware of those limitations? You're very clearly, you know what's happening constantly. Do you feel like that infiltrates into your writing, or do you just write, yeah?
I think that everything I know informs what I do, or I hope it does. You know, I try and stay present in that. And also, I differ a little bit from Bernardine in that, you know, when I was young, I've always been lucky enough to have people say to me, your writing is important to me, which doesn't mean it won prizes or whatever. Just people were always there saying, oh, I like this, or this is important to me. So I've always felt like you might be the only two, but okay. I'm working for you. We're working together towards this thing. And some of those people are white. Some of them are women. Some of them are men. So when I speak about whiteness, it's not about white people as individuals. It's about a system. And a system that refuses to shift. And for it to shift, we're all going to have to be on board for that. Nothing I write individually is going to do it. And I come out of a long tradition of people, from Sojourner Truth to Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Toni Morrison, Bell Hooks, Bernardine, people around me, everyone using language to give that younger generation a way in. I love it when I feel I encounter a writer who's 30 years younger than me, and I feel like, oh, I couldn't have written this. But I know they couldn't have written that without me and without you. But now they've done something that's bigger than anything I could have done. So that's the conversation I'm in. And it's going to happen no matter what's happening, as long as we keep reading.
Can I just say something? Yeah. Sorry, just say something in case we don't get a chance to say it, because it's called A Long Story. So, no, I think we have been covering it. We have been covering it, but I don't know if Claudia agrees with me, but the secret to having a career, in my opinion, apart from all the career stuff, the business of being a writer, the publishing contracts and the rest of it, is a commitment to the art form, isn't it? A commitment to the art form and a commitment to craft, irrespective of everything else. And that's the thing that keeps you going, isn't it? The passion, the love for it, keeps you going for decades until you're no longer here. But your books are.
I know you. I'm going to let her. I know there was some of you with more questions. Sorry, we can't go over time, but I want to let you, because you had your hand raised.
So I just have to say that there is so much power in the room, and what a privilege for us all to really witness it. So this session has been what I would describe as incendiary. It's rage-inducing, but at the same time, I'm amazed, Claudia, by your sense of equanimity. And I'm also very much amazed by Bernardine's spirit and verve, and just being the center of the universe is what you've mentioned yesterday. I am a teacher-educator here in the UAE, so I'm just wondering, what can we do better, or what can we do less of?
But I would make can I advocate for something? Can we hear this question as well, okay, and then we could answer them both?
Hi, thank you so much. It was just a quick one. I feel like so many ethnic minority writers, I'm from the UK as well, I feel like they're often asked about the quote-unquote pain or the struggle associated with whichever respective culture they come from. But I wanted to ask the both of you, either as a writer or a human, what brings you joy?
Netflix.
To bring the two questions together, and Bernardine's last point, what can we do better? I think we can look at what is joyful in the act of creation. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to be excited about writing if they're not excited about the craft of writing, as you were saying, and the history. And, I love So many writers, so many books. And, you know, I just read Small Things Like These, the Claire Keegan book. And I was like, oh my God, how did she do it? I want to do it. I want to write like this. I mean, I was overcome by how beautiful that book was. So I think that in terms of doing better, it's not forgetting, as Bernardine said, why we're here. We're here because we love literature. We understand the power of language. And it does give us joy. Or else we wouldn't keep at it, you know?
Thank you. And thanks for advocating that question there. The conversation continues. I'd like to a few thank yous for the session sponsor, the U.S. State Office, for the AV team and the volunteers and the translators, for all of you, the audience, Emirates Airlines, Dubai Culture, and of course, Emirates Literature Foundation. Thank you all, and thank you for coming.